There are new concerns about a possible resurgence of COVID-19.
This is due to a massive number of unvaccinated people in certain parts of the country. Stephanie Whitfield connects the dots.
It seems like the finish line for the coronavirus pandemic is in sight, but scientists warned 5 large clusters of unvaccinated people in the U.S. could push that finish line further back. Let's connect the dots. Researchers at Georgetown University tracking COVID vaccination rates identified 5 clusters of unvaccinated people that could pose a problem. Those clusters include residents in Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Missouri. Most include rural areas, but also some smaller cities. In all, more than 15 million people live in those clusters, and less than 30% are fully vaccinated. The U.S. COVID-19 Vaccination Tracking Project says the fact that these are clusters is a problem. We don't interact with other people at random. Instead, we socialize with people that live near us, meaning unvaccinated people in those areas have a greater chance of interacting with other unvaccinated people, allowing COVID to spread. So why do those clusters matter, especially if you're already vaccinated? Scientists warn these areas could be the next breeding ground for a COVID-19 variant. The Delta variant is already much more contagious than the original COVID-19, and vaccines appear to be less effective against it. The next variant could be worse. Experts warn the longer COVID spreads, the more opportunity it has to mutate. Connecting the dots, I'm Stephanie Whitfield, KHOU 11 News.